Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Trusted Sec's webinar on ensuring ransomware resiliency. My name is Stephen Marshowitz, Director of Program Development here at Trusted Sec, and ransomware was still the hottest topic at most of the conferences the last couple of months. It touches on so many aspects of your program, and many of the companies really have been upended from a security standpoint in the last 2 years as a result of an incident. So we'll be talking about a lot of different things along this realm, but first a few housekeeping items. We are going to be recording the webinar, so you can go back and review it on our YouTube page or under the links on our main site under events. And definitely ask questions along the way. We'll look to either answer them either during or at the end, but we'll make sure we get to them no matter how long it goes. So a little bit about Trusted Sec. One of the nice things is we're always innovating. And one of the highlights, especially from an advisory standpoint, is typically you either do an audit or an assessment. So an audit being against you, like, in other words, show me the control, the policy, demonstrate proof that it works as intended. Whereas an assessment is a for you review that looks to help build your program with a prioritized roadmap. Now, if you haven't noticed in the last year or so, some of this stuff has gotten really, really complex. And those days of, hey, you just need to implement MFA as a core component of your recommendations, those days are gone. So as an added benefit, one of the things that we do is we've developed a newer methodology whereby we are able to look not only at the security controls, but also advise on how to comply with an audit for that control. So because of the complexity of getting that right solution, and there's so many of them, especially again, some of the conferences, if you've ever been, all the different tools and products and companies, it's very difficult to get all that right. So what we are able to do now is bring in or consult with an expert in every area of the review to give you that level of depth of consultation, really unmatched anywhere in the industry. So it's a huge benefit, and we definitely encourage you to take advantage of it. So today we'll be leading with a great addition to our advisory team, Steph Saunders, who joined us in the last year and a half or so. Steph, would you start giving us a little background about yourself?
Hi, my name is Steph Saunders. I have been in cybersecurity for about 10 years now. I started in the critical manufacturing sector and moved on to retail and some other organizations. Also during those 10 years, I have been on the board of directors for our local InfraGard Pittsburgh chapter, where I currently serve as our treasurer. So building those relationships, being part of InfraGard, has really helped me in my consulting role here at Trusted Sec. I also mentor women and other individuals who are interested in getting into cybersecurity for our Pennsylvania's 3 Cups of Coffee program. So this program runs across the country, and we just sit down with those who are interested in cyber and provide some feedback on how we got into our fields and what they can do to improve. I'm also an active volunteer for B-Sides Pittsburgh. So, thank you, Steve.
Great.
Okay, so ransomware. How does it all start? Well, hackers, that's who. So we're going to discuss the who, why, and how. So a lot of people ask, who? It's the threat actors. The hackers that you see, sometimes on TV or that you hear about in the news. It's the people that if you're working in information security, they're scanning your network and trying to get in. So this is from Mr. Robot. A lot of people are familiar with this scene, and one of the #1 ways of getting into people's network is social engineering, trying to exfiltrate the perimeter, and that's very common with ransomware. So the next question is why? Why did they do it? What is the threat actor's motivation for launching a ransomware attack? So according to the FBI, it's obviously monetarily based. So if we look at, some statistics from 2021, these are just the amount of complaints that were registered. That doesn't even include, the ones that went unnoticed. And same for the amount of losses. So over the last 5 years, there's been about $18.7 billion in total losses due to ransomware. And 6.9 alone is recorded for 2021. Now, as you can see, the amount of complaints here as each year goes on is far less than the amount of losses. So it's really important that if your company suffers a ransomware attack, that you actually are filing complaints. This is how the FBI is able to step in and help. And this also helps data to help drive programs. And, if you're one of those people who are lucky enough to recover funds, they can help you there too. But until you reach a certain threshold, you may not get assistance in a ransomware event. So it's important to always report them. So real losses, business email compromise is still one of the #1 ways that, people get in with ransomware or any cyber event. $2.4 billion is lost here. The FBI reported ransomware is about 49.2 million based off of 2021. And as you can see, it affects everybody when you're looking at the types of crimes and definitely, what type of critical infrastructure you're part of. Everybody is a victim. The most important thing is the unreported ransomware. That's over $20 billion that goes unreported. So again, if you are a victim of ransomware or any sort of cyber threat, it is critical to report it. IC3 is one of the best places to do that. That will get you in touch with your local FBI, and they can get a case started and you'll be on your way.
Yeah, that is interesting that business email compromise is still #1. And we've talked about that for a while, but clearly ransomware has made all the headlines. But I think even from our incident response, we still see that business email compromise is still a pervasive problem.
For sure. It's definitely the low-hanging fruit. And again, monetization, ransomware and extortion. If we look at some statistics, in 2017, it was pretty new. And as we go on through the years up through 2021, it's a steady climb. So it isn't the most newest threat, but it's definitely the most rampant right now. And like you said, Steve, business email compromise is one of the #1 ways this is a continued threat. So let's talk about how. How do the threat actors, perform this sort of attack? So the most common attack path, obviously, is, human operated. And what the attackers are looking for is a way into your network. So this could be through phishing, password or credential guessing, exploiting certain software weaknesses, and just email in general. People who use their personal email, business emails, attackers are always looking for the easy way in. And once they find that easy way in, whether it's sending a phishing email or, brute forcing a password, then they're into your network. And once they get into that network, they can infect other devices and do privilege escalation, or they may target a specific account being an administrator and get full access to the system from there and infect other devices. So once they've done this part, they kind of move on to the backups. And that's where the impact on the target is really important, because you don't know what the bad guys want sometimes. They can encrypt all your data, which is typical with ransomware. That's how you know it's a ransomware attack. But they can steal all your business data. And like we said, even though it's for monetary value, you don't know what sort of data they find interesting. It could be trade secrets, it could be personal data, it could be financials. So it's always important to kind of know where your data is and take care of it. Once they go through destroying your backups and getting all this data and encrypting it, you will get the ransom demand. And we'll show you what that screen looks like in a little bit. But what they usually do is deliver that ransom note to the administrator, and this could be done in a variety of ways. It could be through a browser that you see with the red scary we've encrypted all your files screen, or it could just be a text file on your desktop and you just see that files are getting locked out and you can't access certain things. So from start to finish, getting passwords, penetrating the system, infecting devices, and destroying everything and encrypting things, and then delivering the note. That is the basic flow of how the ransomware works.
So just to hit on that poll, it's kind of interesting of what the top three are with, of course, financial loss, that's what we would expect people are most concerned with, but then the timely response and remediation. So, in your experience, what have you seen just in particular? Why have things taken so long just in general to notice? And then what have been sort of the biggest problems with remediating some of these findings? And I know we'll get into it a little bit later, but just kind of from a high level.
I think, especially with ransomware and any other compromise, it starts well before you actually know it has hit. So there's a lot of recon that goes on before the attack is, noticeable to people in your organization. So that can be a long timeline, especially in a ransomware incident, because when you're trying to recover those backups, you need to be very specific on when you know that initial indicator of compromise happened.
Right.
So we'll talk about some of the variants here. This was in 2021. Some of these were the top variants, mostly impacting critical infrastructure, but it affected a lot of other users as well. So for those of you who may have had to deal with this on the front lines, you may recognize some of these names. Conti being one of the higher ones that has hit, infrastructure in the past year here. So let's talk about ransomware resiliency. At Trusted Sec, we do ransomware resiliency assessments, and I've had the pleasure to do a few of them now. We base it off of the NIST framework, which a lot of our assessments we do in advisory are based off the NIST framework. So if we look at kind of the full circle here, we start with the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And each one of these areas has specific topics that we cover while we're doing an assessment. And the important thing that we stress to people while we review these is that it is an assessment. This isn't an audit. You can't audit against ransomware. There's not a framework, really for it. It's making sure that you prepare yourself ahead of time and that you go through your environment in a holistic approach to make sure that you're in the best position possible to combat ransomware. So the top three things we kind of dig into, in addition to the NIST framework, is business systems analysis. We want to know how everything ties into one another, how it's connected, how systems talk to one another, internally, externally. Nobody knows your business better than you. So during this assessment, we really like to hear the full story. We like to uncover as much as we can to get the bigger picture to help. Same goes for network and security. We do an architecture review to make sure that important things like firewalls and any sort of architecture that you're putting in place, you have in place, whether it's old or new, is appropriate for your environment. And if you were to get hit by ransomware, we can provide some good recommendations on how to strengthen your architecture. And the third thing, which I definitely touched upon, is having good communication with external partners in law enforcement. External partners being, any sort of providers you have, third-party vendors, even, if you do have an incident like PR firms, insurance companies. And as far as law enforcement, it's not just the FBI, it's your local, state, and federal, because it all starts somewhere. So building those relationships ahead of time and knowing who to contact is so critical when a ransomware event occurs. So we'll start with the first part, which is identify. In the identification phase, we focus on asset management and mapping, the business environment, governance, risk assessments, and the risk management strategy. And we'll cover the most important thing here, which is definitely going to be asset management. So asset management is essential. What is included with asset management? Account provisioning, authentication, identity and authorization, the different types of accounts you have in your environment, password management, and the newest thing that we will talk about lots through this webinar, which is multi-factor authentication. And physical security also plays a role. I know many people don't think of physical security in a cyber incident, but it is very important. It's, when you're securing devices, and I'm sure even now with COVID, more people are home, but making sure that we have the proper level of encryption on our laptops if we're taking them out of the house. Same with our mobile devices. And also, it could be just USB, those types of things. So physical security does play a role in ransomware resiliency as well. So we always want to protect our infrastructure. And that's the other part of the NIST framework. So what do we look at protection-wise? Awareness and training, data security, protecting all of our processes and procedures, and all the information that goes with it. In ransomware, you'll notice once the bad guys are in, they're going to look for those things. They want to know, how do you provision accounts? Where do you keep things? Where do you keep backups? And I'm sure with SharePoint and some other, repositories that you keep this information in certain places. Well, if they've been on your network doing recon, they might be looking for those things. Also, maintenance is key. Making sure that everything's updated and patched and performed regularly. And that also includes third-party vendors, that you have the right communications and right outages and protective controls in that whole maintenance area. Because a lot of compromises, whether it's ransomware or just a cyber breach, can also come from maintenance. Protective technology we cover as well. We may not have all the latest and greatest tools that are out on the market, but making sure that you're using what you have and using it effectively.
So one of the things we do also in the penetration testing, for example, is try to work with you directly to figure out which scenarios you're most concerned about. So, penetration testing has evolved, which is great. You can still just get a basic pen test where, hey, we're not going to give you anything. You try and get out and get into us any which way you can. But what we're seeing is a lot of it when you're kind of working back and forth, and particularly since ransomware has been so prevalent, and I guess, about a quarter of the people from our poll there, a quarter of the people on the webinar today have had incidents. So, you'll probably know very well where your weaknesses are now, what happens, testing out the plans, etc. But to work with your penetration testing firm to make sure that they are covering those things, making it a lot more interactive than it ever used to be, particularly for those internal ones. Because what we see in this protect area is still the majority of organizations are challenged with just the basic hygiene. And so when you look at that maintenance, and it's not easy, right? Because we just say, hey, just patch out your systems. But that doesn't really happen typically.
Right.
And go ahead. Why, from your experience, why have you seen, because everybody knows you need a patch. Okay, got it. But it still doesn't happen on a regular basis in most organizations, or many organizations.
For sure. Definitely, coming from the ICS world, dealing with industrial equipment, you need a full downturn, which could be a full week. So when there is a critical vulnerability that's out, it may not be done in 72 hours because it's going to take coordination between various teams, stopping production, patching those systems. And a lot of times, if it is ICS or SCADA equipment, you need to call the vendors in because sometimes they're the only ones that are able to fully update and patch those systems. So whether you're doing it, online, having them come up here, having them replace parts, that can take much longer than the average person suspects for maintenance. Same goes for retail too. Depending on where you are, what you're selling, and even for finance, having to take any sort of outage to patch a critical vulnerability requires a lot of team effort, and it could take days. Sometimes you're lucky enough that we always say if nobody notices, you had a smooth update and patch. But if you're like me and have had to go and update and patch things, something always goes wrong. You're always having to call back a vendor to say, hey, my update didn't go so well. I got a database offline. So, there's a lot of testing that goes in there too, especially if you're dealing with web applications. You need to have your developers run through all these patches and fixes before you can, put it into production.
It's kind of interesting. How often you talk to the vendors about things like that? How interactive are you with them? Because they can be a great, resource to rely on. You think free, but you're paying for it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
How did you develop that relationship?
That's really something that grows. And, the more you can get in front of it, especially with ransomware, the better. I think vendor management has definitely gained a lot of traction over the years. Whereas, before, not many people had integrated ticketing systems like Jira, and it was just such a struggle to get somebody physically on the phone to say, hey, we need to update and patch this, and we don't have the credentials, we don't have the dongle, we don't have the stuff we need to do it. And, if it is like something that's a legacy piece of equipment, you might have to send it back. One of the best things, though, depending on your infrastructure, is there's lots of local ISAC groups you can belong to. So there's retail, there's like the MSISAC, there's ICS, there's a lot of good CERT teams that they will, and even SANS, they'll send out a lot of good vulnerability information that you'll get it. And so you can kind of plan out like, oh, we do have these things in our environment. So that's where we'll get into vulnerability management. And that's where it's really key, is getting that good information ahead of time. So that way you can plan to patch.
Yeah, very good. And we still see a lot of configuration reviews. Really, really popular right now. For obviously Microsoft 365 is the biggest one, because there's so many people move to it, and there's so many switches and buttons and things to do on it. But also the other different environments, both on-prem and cloud. It's still a big thing. Even when we do pen tests, it's still one of our number one recommendations.
For sure. So with the protection part too, let's talk about some training while we're at it. So as we all know, the human factor is the biggest way in. 82% of the breaches, are usually because of people. So I can't stress enough how important it is to train people. And when we see in ransomware, credentials and phishing are still the top two. And credentials can also be, like you said, from patches. If you're not changing those default credentials to service accounts, to equipment, to routers, switches, whatever it is, you're just giving the bad guys an easy way into your network. So making sure that you also have a very good process of, we talk about the physical security, but too here, when you're getting new equipment in, that it goes through kind of a sanitization process where you're validating that that is actually the hardware you ordered, that's the switch you ordered, that it's configured correctly before it gets onto your network, and that any sort of credentials, are changed. And if you can use multi-factor for those accounts, you always should. So the human factor is definitely still, a big thing, and it can be from configuring stuff. It's not always clicking a link.
Right. Yeah, because we've definitely gotten much more sophisticated than we were on social engineering, people recognizing things. We have, a lot of tools now that are testing our employees. So yeah, they're even though, just clicking on a link is of course the most popular one, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way that they're getting in through your end users.
Yeah. And, I just got back from DEF CON, and they still do the social engineering village, and there are still people calling up, users and asking them, for their user ID and password, and hey, what's your dog's name? And, all those ways to get in the door. So the human element is always going to be there no matter what. So that's the importance of having a strong security awareness program. And same for the training. So if anybody out there has seen this screen, this is bad. This was from WannaCry, and this is when you know you have been a victim of ransomware. It can be a notepad, but mostly it's probably going to pop up like this, and it's scary. And a lot of people don't know what to do, and that's why security and awareness training is so important. I have helped to develop security and awareness training at many companies that I have worked at. And I will say that you need to perform it often, and you need to have it be relevant, because phishing is still the #1 way. So whether it's, somebody in the store, somebody on the shop floor, somebody in IT, somebody in HR, they all need to be trained on what to do in a ransomware incident. So when they see the screen, you need to make sure that they're going to do the right thing and not cause further damage to the company or the banner. Because at the end of the day, for every company, protecting your banner and the name of your company is always the most important. And I think, we learned that first in the Target breach a long time ago. That was probably one of the first retail, cyber events that happened. And, just the credibility, no matter what company you're at, you need to make sure everybody's trained. Same for the smishing, phishing, and social engineering part. A lot of people think it just comes through a phishing email, but sure enough, it can come on your phone. It can come through a phone call. It used to be called the old phone or toner. And they still do it. They're still going to call up and say, I'm Stephanie from Microsoft support, and I saw you have this malicious process running on your computer. Can you open command prompt? That is still a way in.
Can you, just got a question, go into a little bit more about what smishing and phishing is?
So smishing is the SMS texting, and we'll definitely get into this, especially regarding the multi-factor authentication. So, everybody texts these days, and, it's a lot more bring your own device or even your corporate devices that our phone numbers are out there, because whether you're signing up for a brand new account or, you're out shopping, you're giving that phone number to somebody. So chances are it probably is your cell phone number, and yeah, you're going to get a lot of weird text messages, and a lot of them have odd links. So just like phishing, if you're not expecting it, don't click on it. And same with the phishing, your desk phone. I mean, we'll talk about social media in a second, but how many people honestly put their cell phone on social media? Not many. Or on their business cards. It's probably your desk phone. And so if you do answer your desk phone and it's somebody pretending that they're from the IT department or, wherever it is, you need to remain vigilant. And there's good ways to kind of verify that. Like if you're not sure, hang up the phone. Look them up in the directory. Say, hey, what's your name? You know what? I'm in a meeting right now. Can I call you back in 5 minutes? They're going to try to keep you on the phone as long as you can. And, the longer you can stall, the better, until you can truly verify who that person is. So,
and then what about their personal, if they're getting personal emails and things like that? Have you seen, a lot of times we'll do training and not only, hey, this is what you should look out for our organization, but also for yourself.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point that I meant to bring up earlier. So Cisco, had a recent breach, and it was from a group that, normally does perform ransomware, and their compromise actually started from somebody's Google account.
Right.
So their Google email is where, the bad guys got the credentials from and compromised the account and started, enrolling this person's device. And we'll kind of talk through some of that as we go along here. But yes, if you're using your personal email and your work email and you're using them on the same machine, you need to be so careful. That's the reason. I know it's, I know a lot of companies block personal email, and it's so frustrating, but there are reasons for it. And a lot of it is because you don't want to be sharing those credentials or reusing passwords or anything like that.
Yeah, and every time we have our own personal aspect into it, it makes it just a lot more interesting, doing those trainings, things like that. So it's not just, hey, we're from corporate, we're here to help, and you need to do this, this, and this. It's like, hey, this is actually going to help you in your own personal life.
Yeah, the more you can limit, your personal stuff. And same goes for at home. I have 2 gorgeous little kids, and They love computers, they love buttons, they love my phone. And, just making sure that you're protecting your work assets also. So yeah, I mean, your kids might try to play on your computer, or, if you're using your home computer, just make sure that you're watching what's going on there at home too. And also for security awareness training, being able to identify if it's ransomware. This is really important to train the end users, because it changes. I mean, most of the time you'll probably see this ugly red screen, but they're being creative. The attackers are being creative on how they deliver the ransomware note. And it could be kind of more silent, where it's a text pad on the desktop and you won't know for a while and you just see stuff getting locked out. Or it could be very obvious like this. And the most important thing is, one, how do you identify it? And two, do people know who to contact first? And, in IT, I think we all know, like, oh, call the help desk, or, oh, call the SOC. But for somebody who might be in like HR or finance or legal, they might not know. So that's a good test. You should fish your users regularly and often. I know we do that here. Making sure that you fish people and keep track of metrics. I know as I've started to develop security awareness programs at other companies, we've tracked these metrics throughout the year. And I will say, the more you do it, the better the numbers get. And it's kind of fun when you do training and you bring up the screen, you're like, all right, well, Steve actually entered his credentials.
Right.
So he's on the wall of shame.
What am I notice?
But going back to personal use and business use, with passwords, these are two really great websites to check to see if your personal email or if your work email has been compromised. So you should definitely check both. If you've seen that they have been compromised and you get like the red, oh no, you're on some list, please change your password. Change your passwords both to your work and your personal one if it's recent. I always have the rule, if I'm changing my work password, I probably should change my personal one too, just out of good cyber hygiene. And don't reuse passwords as well. I've gone through a lot of security reviews, and even when people request like, hey, in our governance documents, we need some policies and procedures, I include this. I include that you should tell your users they are not to reuse your company user ID and password for personal use. It is just a bad idea.
Right.
So, and that goes to good password hygiene. Again, this is the number one way in. So
it's amazing how often from the penetration testing we see password audit. You need to do a password audit.
Yep. For sure.
I mean, tons and tons of penetration tests that we do show that.
Oh yeah. And they always think, oh, well, we'll use a really long one. Autumn 2022. No, that's a really bad password to use. So that's why we always say use passphrases, don't use passwords. And use a password manager. There's so many great password manager tools, whether it's LastPass, KeyPass. I mean, I even use it for my own personal stuff. And that's a nice thing. If you have LastPass, you can have a personal instance and a corporate one. You shouldn't share your passwords between them, by the way, but it's nice just to get used to practicing good cyber hygiene of using that password manager. And also, you can change your passwords in there. You can put notes in there. I know everybody forgets, like, oh, I have to create security questions, and they create the same ones. And that's the other thing too with social media. Don't create your security questions with stuff that's on social media. If you're putting the name of your dog as one of your answers, or your high school or your college, pick something else.
Yep.
Pick something else.
Good question here, going back to the password test sites.
Mm-hmm.
How confident are you that these password test sites aren't saving and connecting back to your name and email?
You are checking your email, so you're only putting in, your Stephanie@gmail.com. So it's going to look for that domain. And also, I think with the Have I Been Pawned still does this, where you can sign up to receive email notifications if yours has been used in a breach, or your domain. So we used to do this at a couple of different companies I worked at, where we would sign up for the corporate license, and it would go out and do the searches for us. that if it was anybody at asterisk, like asterisk@company.com, it would send us a list or send us alerts that, hey, Steve at trustedtech.com showed up on this LinkedIn breach list, and we would know, oh, we got a list of some people that we need to go do mandatory password resets for. So yeah, that's a very good question. You're not putting in, and please don't ever put in your email address and password if it's not for your email. But putting in your email address, it's not going to put you on a specific list. It's just going to look if it matches. So.
And how often, another question, how often do you recommend going to those sites or checking?
I do mine probably every time I change my password. So if it's every 90 days, that's a good one. I mean, minimum, I would say, every 6 months at least.
Sure.
Yeah, because a breach typically, from start to finish could be anywhere from like 3 to 9 months. So I think if you're doing it quarterly, just like how most of the frameworks recommend changing your password, that's pretty good to do. And last thing I'll talk about, this was very common in the latest Cisco breach, was browser credentials. So the way that they found, this person's credentials was that they compromised their Gmail account. And that's why we talked about checking your, your credentials on the Have I Been Pawned or the Intellex website, because if your Gmail account wasn't a breach, chances are somebody's out there using them. And they're going to try for that. And if they do, like they did with this individual, if you're using a browser at work and at home and you're signed in with your Gmail account, it gives you that nice option, because Google likes to be helpful, right? Hey, can we save your password? Please click no. Just use, it's one thing to use the LastPass browser extension on things that you know and trust. If it's on your work laptop and you trust it, that's fine. But if it's just the generic, Gmail, like, let me save all your passwords or put it in your password vault, don't do that. Just stick to one and know that's the only place you're going to save it. I think there is an option to disable it, which I'll have to look into, but that's how these people got in. Was this person had logged in with their Gmail account, that are compromised, and they must have been checking their email at work where they found other work related passwords, and that was their foothold into the system. So, and we'll get into the multi-factor part of that as well in a minute here.
Number of the day. The number of the day is 2.
So of course, because I have 2 little ones, I had to have count the count in here. Yes, I cannot stress enough how important using multi-factor authentication is, and use it whenever often. And this goes back to, account management. And during these assessments, I cannot tell you how many people don't deploy multi-factor across all accounts.
Right.
And I just don't understand that. It should be for privileged and non-privileged accounts. Those are probably 2 of my biggest findings when writing reports, because most people think, oh, it's just the admin ones because they can do really cool, crazy stuff. No, it should be a regular one too, because like we said, business email compromise is still big.
Yeah, we're still seeing also that privileged access management. What are you finding when you're doing reviews that people are struggling with most there?
I think just getting everybody enrolled. That's a huge thing with privilege access. And, if you're using a PAM solution that's rotating that password, that's great. But, you need to use it at all layers. So it's not just your admin account. It's like domain admin, service accounts. You'd be surprised with the password, with the PAM solutions, how many people don't have service accounts in there? Those are the biggest things you should have in there. Yes, admins and domain admins are always first, but those service accounts, you want those in there if you can. So, and using an authentication application is so much better than text messages. Like we talked about the smishing, using the Microsoft Authenticator app is actually really good, because on your phone, hopefully you have your password enabled on your phone to get into your phone. 2, you have to open the app. So chances are you're going to have a password for that. And then getting the push notification too. So that brings up the third point. This was also noticed in the Cisco breach that just recently happened, where they took that individual's account, they enrolled their corporate account for like on many devices to use multi-factor. and they started just blasting them and causing multi-factor fatigue, to the point that that person clicked accept, and that's how they got in. So making sure that if you get a push notification sent to your phone, whether it's PayPal, whether it's your work, whether it's Gmail, it doesn't matter who it is, don't accept it if it's not you truly sitting at the computer.
Yep.
And if you see a suspicious one, there is a way with Google and many other applications to check where that device was last logged into and how many connections there are. So I always say it should be a one-to-one connection. And same goes for the authentication, managers and everything, is just use one. Don't have it enrolled on multiple devices. Have it on one device. But yeah, multi-factor will always be the best way to help combat against ransomware, especially because, once they're in, they like to move laterally. If you have, admin accounts and service accounts, then it just makes it harder for them to do privilege escalation because they need that other token. So we'll kind of go a bit into network and backup architecture. And this brought up, we brought up patching those out-of-date systems. While this is still one of the lower things for ransomware, it's still so critical. There's a lot of no longer supported systems still out in many people's networks when we do these assessments, especially, like Windows 7, some XP, and, personal devices, whether it's personal or work, update them. Your old iPhones or Android devices, if they aren't able to be supported, then, you should ask for a new one or try your best to get a new one if you're able to. I don't know how many people do bring your own device, but, if you're not able to get a new company issued phone, then maybe the BYOD is a good solution if they have a good, way to containerize email and protect all the corporate data on that phone. Same with servers. There's a lot of old servers out there. Part of the vulnerability management is, they're going to find a way in through not patching and not being able to update. If you do have these legacy devices in your network, you need to make sure that you're applying the proper compensating controls by using, whitelisting or ACLs, or keeping them segregated on a separate network that's not tied to the normal corporate network with all the good stuff. So, just make sure we're getting everything updated, phones, desktops, servers across the board. So like we've been talking about too, threat management. This is another part of our assessment. We go through the vulnerability scanning. You should be scanning regularly, quarterly, hopefully. And having good logging and monitoring, that's also very important, because when you have a ransomware incident occur, what's the first thing you need to go look for? Logs. Yeah. And monitoring too will definitely tell you what's going on in your network. So being able to fine tune that will really help you know if something weird is going on in your network, because anybody who has been a victim of any cyber attack knows that there was something somewhere that didn't look right, and it probably sat quiet for a while, or hey, now that we know more about it, oh, I found that regex key, I found that initial indicator of compromise. So integrating your threat management program with your incident response plan and your recovery plans too is really important. Same with doing tabletops. I've run quite a few tabletops. We do them here at Trusted Sec as well. And it's really cool to see kind of the lights go on in people's heads when they're from different parts of your organization, and it clicks, because everybody thinks being in security, we're the bad people telling you what to do. But when you actually go through an event from start to finish of getting phished to the point that somebody took over your laptop, a lot of people aren't on the same page of, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to call the help desk. I didn't know I was supposed to do this. Well, what if the help desk gets compromised? Then what do we do? So going through these threat simulations and tabletops is so important in a ransomware scenario, but also executive buy-in, because in an event of this magnitude, you need to make sure that, the executives are ready, they're prepared, because Nobody wants that last minute
And that is a
surprise.
challenge for sure.
Yeah,
Getting that buy-in, but really letting them know that they have responsibilities in this too. It's and not that they would shirk them, but they just generally a lot of times don't know,
right.
particularly when you get to the specifics.
Yeah. So, the other part to the NIST framework is detections, and we just talked about incident response too. So I'll kind of go through this quickly, just making sure as part of that detect phase that you're able to get good stuff into your SIM where you can detect those anomalies and events and have that continuous monitoring. That's what's most important, is that you're continually monitoring for these types of events and able to detect them.
So, another one is that there's lots of logs that, of course, we're paying for, the events per second, checking all those.
Mhm.
How, when you're seeing those is a good process to help determine which ones are the best to monitor. And then, sort of a follow-on, particularly with all of these detection tools, EDRs, network detection, IPS, et cetera. Where does all that fit in to maybe sort of your playbooks or your process for, within that SOC to detect things?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that's our next slide. So logging and monitoring. So there's kind of like two main buckets you want to look at. One is your SIM logs. So these are the purposeful events, the things that you want to see for incident response or want to see things happening on your network. So those are incident and SOC specific ones. So your authentication logs, like, failed login attempts, specific system events like accounts being locked out, other security events that you deem purposeful and meaningful to your environment, whether it's, industrial, manufacturing, retail, finance, whatever. The other bucket we like to put them in is operational logs. So these events might not always be known ones. It doesn't mean you need to have like full-blown logging on every single thing, because you'll overload your SIM, but you need them to be useful for correlation for the bigger picture, for broader events. These could be like your applications, your cloud, your database logs. Now, as far as the database and cloud logs, you always want to have authentication in certain security events, but you might not need every single update table or whatever goes on in there. And just knowing the difference between SIM and EDR is huge, because EDR is what is kind of like the first stop. Like, it'll help prevent malware from spreading or alert you, but you want to make sure those logs are flowing to your SIM and that your SIM is ingesting them properly, so that you can kind of use them interchangeably and know the difference between the SIM and the EDR. Also, having those playbooks is huge for your SOC and for incident response, and can also bring in those good IOCs that if you want to look up, the latest compromise like CVEs or regex, that you can put them in there and you guys are prepared. So no, it's a very good question. Thank you. And response. So yeah, we definitely want to be good in responding to these events. This is where crisis management is such an important thing. Having all the key team players, having a specific ransomware plan, having those playbooks like you just talked about. But most importantly is having those things offline, having them not in the same place where the bad guys are going to be staring at them. That is so important. And also having a separate response plan and knowing how to engage with people inside and outside the company. So that way they're prepared when you have to, maybe you have to deal with PR firms or cyber insurance or whatever. And also these same teams, at what point is it okay to progress to the next step to go to your business continuity and DR plans? When is the crisis management phase over?
Yeah, it becomes super critical with that communication. Back to what you said way back earlier. The having an out-of-band communication path, certain things that you wouldn't have thought of, and not just like the IT folks, but you need to have the executives be part of that as well, which in general wouldn't think that they would want to or be interested in, or it would be too much noise, or they just don't look at, some of them, they're just not looking at those out-of-band communications, so they would never even see it. So testing out those things we've seen has become very, very important too.
Yeah. And, we'll talk about cyber insurance for just a minute. And we just want to make sure that your plan's covering ransomware and that there is a specific differentiation between a cyber event versus a ransomware attack, and that you have those proper tiers lined out, that it includes your incident response plan, because some people do use, companies like us for an IR retainer or for forensics, and, making sure that it covers your backups as well, because your backups are really important in a ransomware event.
Yeah, we've got a couple of webinars on insurance, so definitely check those out.
Yeah, and same for recovery. We'll just kind of breeze through these. Disaster recovery is so critical. They used to think it was just like an act of God, like, oh, my data center got flooded. No, nowadays with ransomware, it's really malware, ransomware, all these things that do target backups. So we want to make sure that your DR plan is prepared to handle those kind of events. And making sure you can restore. This goes along with the tabletops we just talked about. So one, are you prepared to handle a ransomware incident? And two, have you tested your backups that you can actually restore and get back up and running? That you have realistic RTOs and RPOs and the right people are there, and that your documentation is offline, like I said, and that you have it. So yeah, again, keep them separated, keep your backups separate from your network, test them on a regular basis, separate the networks and systems. And this kind of flows into the business continuity. This kind of comes after the crisis management, after the DR. Now we're back to, let's get the business back and running, and making sure that that's specific to ransomware as well. And that we have everybody from all parts of the business, but most importantly, the third-party vendors and all their processes. Are they lined out in each one of these plans? Crisis management, DR, and business continuity. And like I said in the beginning, partnerships are so important. Having a good incident response team and forensics, and if you don't, get a good firm that can help you with that. Knowing your local law enforcement, state and federal, you always want to make those relationships ahead of time. I can tell you first and foremost, you do not want the FBI knocking on your door. I have been that person. So that's why I've been in FreeGuard. Make some good relationships now. For those who aren't sure who your local chapter is, you can sign up and figure out who your local InfraGuard people are. Same with regulatory compliance, whether you're in, finance, critical manufacturing, healthcare, making sure that you have the proper, partnerships for that due diligence piece afterwards, that you're reaching out to those regulators, ensuring your customers' data, and doing everything you can to protect your banner. So if all else, through this whole webinar, there's 5 tips that we're going to tell you to go home with. One is making sure that your backups are immutable. Your admins can't modify them. They shouldn't be able to change them, and they should be in a separate place. Same with those, we like to call it the offline battle box. The passwords, keys, being able to restore, because having them on the same system, the bad guys are going to get those. So make sure they're separate. Number 3, harden your systems. USB drives, like I said, NAC, whatever you need to do proper system hardening. There's really good guidelines out online. You can ask your vendors. And 4th is improving your password identity management and PAM solutions. Making sure that you have a separate domain for your domain admins and IT administrators, and you are using MFA for your backup systems. Like I said, MFA needs to happen across the board. And number 5, monitoring those backups with your SIM, because if the bad guys are attacking your network, they're going to go after your backups too. So having those backup event logs in your SIM is key. So yeah, these are some of the references we had. If you guys want to read about the most recent Cisco event, it's there. There's some good NIST articles.
All right, we have some questions, quite a few on the immutable backups. Are you aware of ransomware actors successfully compromising immutable backup solutions? Any recommendations on how best to go about it? And are there any situations where they think their backups are immutable but are not?
I have not heard of any incident where threat actors have attacked immutable backups. I know there's a couple great solutions out there that they provide those backups, and you definitely should test them as part of your plan. If you're looking into purchasing that service, definitely walk through a scenario with them, test it out.
What differences are you seeing between EDR and antivirus now? Just overall, and then maybe just back to the logging type of thing.
I think some of the antivirus is definitely coming up to speed. I'm still a big proponent of using EDR just because I've been in incident response for over 10 years, that getting those logs in one place and being able to go into that console and blacklist machines from an EDR perspective is great. But at a minimum, yes, everybody needs to have AV, and some of the newer AVs are really great at doing some of those analytics too. So, but I think that goes back to the defense and depth conversation too, is you should have that regardless, antivirus, EDR, but it's really training your users too.
For mid and smaller businesses, what are some of the good opportunities to automate some of the processes or workflows that you've mentioned?
I love this because being at some mid-size and smaller businesses, PowerShell is really helpful, and just creating your own runbooks ahead of time. There might be a couple different steps you got to work out, but being able to, whether it's using a good PowerShell script or kind of having a repository where you know all these logs are in one spot in your SIM, and you can, do your dashboarding in there, whether it's Splunk or Logarithm. Those are good areas.
Someone else, can you go back to the previous slide on the case studies real quick?
The references one?
References, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's what they're
Sure.
looking for. Okay, great. Any common issues with cloud for ransomware as people are moving to the cloud? Any thoughts on that?
I have not dealt with ransomware myself in the cloud. I have helped, deploy some cloud solutions. I will say, hardening is still a very important thing, like your Docker images, your Kubernetes clusters, all that stuff, making sure that certain, just like a normal firewall, I mean, basically it's somebody else's computer, right? So doing those good reviews, firewall reviews, the VPN routing, that kind of stuff, making sure that the correct ports are open, doing an access review for your admin accounts and just your user accounts, especially if you have developers or share a cloud instance with other people, that you're doing a full access review to prevent any sort of accidents or malicious intent there.
Great. And then one last one. How well do VLANs protect from attacks? Specifically ransomware.
I mean, I think they are still great. You definitely need network segmentation at some level. We like to describe like some people's environment as a Cadbury egg, where once you're in with the credentials, you can kind of go anywhere. So having really good VLANs, network segmentation, firewalls, in the appropriate places is really critical.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate everybody's time. And once again, we will be sharing this slide deck. So you'll be getting an email and you can go to our YouTube or check out the events on our website. So check us out there. And again, we'll probably look at some of the other webinars that we had that really sort of dovetail what we talked about today. So with that, Steph, thank you so much for your time today, and really want to thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Steve, and we'll see you next time.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care.